Okay, and then we'll do the salutation to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to him, the blessed one, the worthy one, the fully enlightened one. Okay, so good morning, everybody, and this is August 5th, today, 2023, and we're continuing with our reading of the Anguttara Nikaya, the Numerical Discourses of the Buddha. And you can see that I'm jumping around, choosing the more interesting suttas and those that require some explanation. And so today we'll be taking sutta number 179. But I just wanted to point out that before we come to that sutta, there's a whole series of suttas that promote or that endorse and advocate the observance of what are called the 5 precepts, the 5 training rules. So we have like 174, even going back earlier. Some of them are a bit severe. Like one sutta will explain 5 qualities on account of which a lay follower is overcome by timidity. That is, he breaks the 5 precepts, whereas another lay follower is confident, has self-confidence. That is, that they observe the 5 precepts. Then another sutta speaks about how a lay follower goes reborn in hell, that is by breaking the 5 precepts, and how a lay follower goes to heaven by observing the 5 precepts, and so on. And so I'm not going to elaborate on those suttas because they're pretty self-evident, but you can read them on your own. And then there's a sutta which speaks about, it's quite an important sutta for those living the lay life, though it's not elaborated, and it's often quoted. It's a sutta that speaks about 5 types of trade in which a lay follower should not engage. So these are, you could say, the 5 types of wrong livelihood, and that is dealing in weapons, dealing in living beings, which could be understood as raising living beings, animals for slaughter, and trading in meat. This is trading in the meat of the animals, trading in intoxicants, trading in poisons. And today we could probably expand this list exponentially and probably see many implications in each of these types of wrong livelihood. Like trading in living beings, maybe we could say those who engage in human trafficking, taking advantage of people, exploiting them, in order to earn more money. Okay, but today we want to focus on sutta number 179. So here the Buddha is going to be speaking to his lay follower, Anathapindika, who comes to the Buddha with 500 lay followers. And when we say this number 500, we shouldn't take it too literally. It seems to be just a convenient expression indicating a large number. Like maybe today we could say, Bhikkhu Bodhi is teaching a class with 500 students, but when we count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there are actually 5 people in person here. But if some historian is writing the story about this class, he'll say, he was teaching a class with 500 students. Okay, so then when Anathapindika sits down, the Buddha doesn't speak directly to Anathapindika, but he speaks to Sariputta. But obviously the Buddha's statement to Sariputta is aimed at Anathapindika and his group of lay followers. So again, he starts off, so this I think is what connects this sutta with the previous ones. But the Buddha begins by saying that any white-robed householder whose actions are restrained by 5 training rules and who gains at will, without trouble or difficulty, 4 pleasant, visible dwellings that pertain to the higher mind, might, if he, or we could say she, so wish, they could declare of themselves that I am finished with hell, the animal realm, and the realm of the pretas, the tormented spirits. I'm finished with the plane of misery, the bad destinations, the lower world. I am a stream enterer, no longer subject to rebirth in the lower world, fixed in destiny, heading for enlightenment. So the theme, we could say the theme of this sutta will be the qualities of the sotapanna, the stream enterer. And so before we come to the sutta itself, or to the text of this sutta itself, I'm going to elaborate a little bit on the meaning of a stream enterer. Okay, but first we take the 5 training rules by which the actions are restrained. And again, this is what we commonly call the 5 precepts, that the noble disciple abstains from the destruction of life, that is, from killing living beings, from taking what is not given or stealing, from sexual misconduct, from deliberately telling lies, and then from the use of liquor, wine, and intoxicants. So the actions are restrained by these 5 training rules. And this is maybe an aside, but it's an interesting point. Usually in contemporary Buddhist discourse, we say that one observes the pancha sila. And so we take that to be the 5 precepts. But actually in the canonical text, I think I did a search for this in the past, we don't actually find the expression panchasila occurring in the oldest texts. What we have are the 5 training rules, and the expression for this would be pancha sikapadani. So sika is training, and pada, one of the meanings can be factors. So and here it's translated rules, the 5 factors of training. And so we could say that one observes not 5 silas, but 5 sikapada, training rules. And when one is well grounded in these training rules, then you could say that one's conduct conforms to the standards of 5 silas. The sila is, the literal meaning of sila is a mode of conduct. And sometimes it can be bad conduct or good conduct. But usually when we use sila alone, it suggests good conduct. And so what one actually undertakes are the training rules, the sikapada. And when one's conduct conforms to the training rules, then one is said to be silava, one who has, or silavant, one who has good conduct, who possesses good conduct. And that would be conduct that is governed by the training rules. Okay, so now we're going to come to the topic of the stream enterer. And for this, I've compiled a little file, and I'm going to blow it up a bit. Okay, so what is the meaning of stream enterer? So the stream enterer is the first of the four, called the Four Noble Stages, the 4 stages of noble attainment, which culminates in the achievement of the final goal of the Buddhist spiritual life. So we could say that actually the ultimate goal of the Buddhist spiritual life would be the attainment of final nibbana, or the nibbana element, with no residue remaining. So that means complete liberation from the cycle of repeated birth and death. And in approaching this attainment, there are these 4 stages, and each stage is defined in terms of the fetters eliminated and the number of rebirths remaining. I'm not going to go through all of these stages, but the stage of stream entry is that we could say it's the stage at which one makes the first experiential breakthrough to realizing the truth of the Dhamma, the truth of the ultimate nature of things, the true ultimate nature of things. It's the stage in which one gains the first glimpse of nibbana, that unconditioned reality, above and beyond the cycle of conditioned phenomena. And so with the attainment of this stage, there comes the eradication, the complete elimination of the 3 grossest fetters that tie one to the cycle of rebirths. That is the view of a substantial self, of a real self behind the process of experience. So that view of a real self, the conceptual commitment to the idea of a self, is eliminated. It doesn't mean that the stream enterer is completely free from all traces of egotism, of all sense of I and mine. That is eliminated only at the stage of arhatship. But the stream enterer, the ideas of I and mine still occur to them, but they no longer take those ideas as pointing to a real entity, to a truly existing self. And then, since they have seen the truth of the Dharma, they've seen the ultimate truth, they no longer have any doubt that the Buddha is an enlightened one who has fully realized and taught that truth, and no longer have any doubt about the Dhamma because they've seen the Dhamma for themselves. It's said in the description of the attainment of stream entry that one becomes Dita Dhammo, Vidita Dhammo, Jnata Dhammo, Pariyogalha Dhammo, one who has seen the Dhamma, known the Dhamma, understood the Dhamma, fathomed the Dhamma. And then they no longer have any clinging to precepts and observances. It doesn't mean that they don't observe the precepts, but they don't cling to the precepts with the idea that just observing precepts and in going through certain ritualistic observances, that is the way to liberation. So they know that it is the practice of the Noble Eightfold Path, or the stages of Sila, Samadhi, and Panya, moral virtue, concentration, and wisdom, that is the way to liberation. And so the stream enterer, at the stage of stream entry, one has eliminated all future rebirths, except at the most 7 more rebirths, and those will take place either back into the human realm or in the higher celestial realms, but no prospect of any future rebirth in the 3 lower realms, the hells, the realm of the animals, or the sphere of the hungry ghosts. And then once one attains stream entry, then one is bound irreversibly to go through the higher stages up to arhatship, and then with the passing away as an arahat, then one enters and attains the final nibbana element with no residue remaining. Okay, then I just brought in a sutta in which there's a whole series of suttas in which the Buddha praises the attainment of stream entry in various ways. And in this series of suttas, this is in the Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 13, he refers to that attainment as using the Pali word abhisamaya, or actually more fully, it's dhamma abhisamaya. So we could say that this is the realization of the Dhamma, or here I translated it as the breakthrough to the Dhamma. So in this sutta, the Buddha takes up a little bit of soil in his fingernail, and then he asks the monks, what do you think is more, the little bit of soil that I have in my fingernail, or the soil spread out over this great earth? And then, of course, the monks say that the soil of the great earth is much more, what you've taken in your fingernail is just a tiny, tiny portion of the soil of the great earth. And so then the Buddha says that for the noble disciple, the one who has made the breakthrough, the suffering, the dukkha that has been eliminated is more, while that which remains is just tiny bit, because what you have destroyed is all of the future suffering in samsara over countless millions and millions of future births, while the suffering that remains is the suffering that one will experience in just 7 more lifetimes. And so he says it's of such great benefit to attain the breakthrough to the Dhamma, the Dhamma abhisamaya. Of such great benefit is it to obtain the Dhammacakku. The Dhammacakku is the eye of the Dhamma. That is the wisdom that directly, personally, immediately sees the truth of the Dhamma. So until we reach that experience, that attainment, we could say, we have some conceptual understanding of the Dhamma. Maybe through our insight meditation, we get some, maybe you call this provisional experience of the Dhamma. We get some experience of impermanence, contemplating the arising and passing of things, of phenomena in the body and the mind. We could see some aspects of the Dhamma, maybe even some glimpses of anatta, of non-self, when the idea of self seems to temporarily vanish with seeing the impermanence of the mental phenomena, so that we don't cling to the mind as a self. But this is just like a shadow of the real thing. But it's with the attainment of stream entry that one sees beyond the impermanent phenomena and sees the ultimate Dhamma, the ultimate truth. Yeah, so for details, you can look. There's a whole of about 11 or 12 suttas in this chapter of the Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 13. They all just involve different similes to illustrate the benefits of stream entry. Okay, then how does one arrive at stream entry? Yeah, we'll have the questions later. Okay, this is a sutta now. We're still in the Samyutta Nikaya. Now we go to chapter 55. Here the Buddha speaks about 4 things that lead to the realization of the fruit of stream entry. So these are the 4 sort of steps that one has to undertake in order to arrive at stream entry. So the first, and this is a very important point, that the Buddha speaks about association with good persons. So the word for good persons is sappurisa. So the word sap here is actually it's sant purisa. And maybe the word sant is related to the English word saint, I'm not sure. But it really means associating with people who are deeply grounded in the Dharma, and particularly the Buddha will say to associate with the Arya Pugalas, with the noble ones. So we might not know who the noble ones are, but at least associate with those who are able to teach the noble Dharma. And this underscores the importance of, there's another term that the Buddha often uses in the suttas, kalyana mita. This is good friends. So even though you don't know who the noble ones might be, but you should associate with kalyana mita, with good friends, friends who are grounded in a commitment to the Dhamma, who observe the precepts, who engage in some sort of meditation practice, with whom you can study the Dharma, share the Dhamma, discuss the Dhamma. So that is an important step along the way, an essential step. Of course, some people just can live a very solitary life, and thereby they gain access to the Dhamma. Because now with books, with the internet, you can gain access to the Dhamma without having to rely on other people. But still, one could say that there are benefits that come from associating with others that share your convictions, your commitment, your aspirations, your values, that can sort of encourage you and inspire you and help you as you strive on the path. We have to remember, in the Buddha's time, there was no, of course, I don't think there was internet in those days, was there? Yeah, maybe not, but no internet, no computers. How about books? Could you go to the library or a bookshop and get a book on the Dharma? No. Could you go to the monastery where they have the books written out, in palm leaf manuscripts? No, there were no, even in the Buddha's time, not even palm leaf manuscripts. So if you want to learn the Dhamma, the only way is to go to find people who know the Dhamma, who have it preserved in their minds. and then can teach it verbally. So in that sense, association with good persons is indispensable. Okay, then when you associate with good persons, then you have the opportunity, particularly if those good persons are teachers of the Dhamma, then you have the opportunity to hear the Dhamma, the good Dhamma or the true Dhamma. And interestingly, again, here we have the word is Dhamma. I just noticed this. I didn't notice this before. But we have the same prefix here in front of persons and Dhamma. So in the stem form, it would be Sat. But in front of the P, the T gets changed into a P. So we have Sappurisa, and in front of a D, the T gets changed to a D. So we get Saddhamma. And then this prefix Sat has the two meanings, which is an interesting feature about the Indian culture, of true and good. So this idea of truth and goodness sort of are blended in this concept of Sat. In the Greek philosophy, stemming from Plato, we have the ideas of the true, the good, and the beautiful, as though they're distinguished. But in the Indian way of thinking, the true and the good are merged in this one concept. So we have the Saddhamma, which is the true Dhamma, and also the good Dhamma. And to advance along the path, you have to know how to practice, and you have to know what you should be looking for through your practice. And for that, you have to find opportunities to listen to the true Dhamma, or to learn the true Dhamma. Of course, nowadays, if you want to listen to the true Dhamma, you go to YouTube and you can find maybe thousands of Dhamma talks on YouTube or other sources. But again, in the Buddha's time, you have to go, usually you would have to go to the monastery, unless there are some lay disciples who are learned in the Dhamma and can teach. And in this way, you have the chance to learn the Dhamma. Then the third step is called in Pali, yoniso manasi kara. So here this is translated as careful attention, but there is like so many nuances of yoniso manasikara that are hard to capture in any single English word. Like yoniso is actually based on the word yoni. One of the meanings of the word yoni is the womb. So it seems, and then yoniso turns it into an adverb. So the sense is almost like going back to the womb. The womb is the origin point. And so when you go back to the womb, you're going through something very, very thoroughly, very carefully, very methodically. And then manasikara is from manasi, means in the mind, and kara is activity. Activity in the mind that goes back to the basics of things, back to the origin of things, and that explores things from the origin outwards. So it's thorough, here, careful attention, but we could say thorough reflection, methodical investigation, thorough examination, so many ways of rendering yoniso manasikara. But basically what this means is that when you hear the Dhamma, then you have to reflect on it, examine it, turn it over in the mind in order to ensure that you have a clear, accurate, reliable, conceptual understanding of the Dhamma. An understanding both of the theory and the practice, the method of practice. And then once, or on the basis of that clear conceptual understanding of theory and practice, then one comes to the fourth factor, which is, in Pali, it's dham anu dhamma. Pati, which means practice of the Dhamma in accordance with the Dhamma. So this means that you practice in the way sort of that's guided by the aim of the Dhamma, and that will lead to the realization of the Dhamma. So those are the four, called the four things that lead to the realization of the fruit of stream entry. So we could say these are four, sometimes they're called the four factors for stream entry. The four factors for the attainment of stream entry. And then the Buddha, interestingly, in the next sutta, he mentions that the same four things bring about the attainment of once returning, non-returning, and arhatship. So until you achieve the final goal, then you need those four things. Okay, so what is practice in accordance with the Dhamma? What is this Dhammano Dhamma Patipatti? So of course the foundation of the practice is going to be the observance of the Sikkhapada, the training rules, or you could say the precepts. In the case of the lay follower, the 5 precepts. For monastic followers, at least the core of the monastic discipline. But then we come to the training, the meditative training, and here I've taken the sutta spoken by the Venerable Ananda, in which he's addressing his fellow monks, and he says that any bhikkhu or bhikkhuni who has declared the attainment of arhatship in my presence has done so in one of 4 ways. But I've taken only the first 2, which are really the main ways. The other 2 are sort of secondary. So one way is that you develop serenity or calm first. This is samatha. And then based upon the attainment or some skill in samadhi, then one develops insight, vipassana. And then as one is developing insight based on calm, then the path arises, and then one develops that path, and as one does so, then the fetters are abandoned and the tendencies are uprooted. In other words, based on you develop serenity, calm or concentration first, then insight, and then through insight, one reaches the path that brings the attainment of stream entry. The other major approach, you develop insight first. So you start directly with insight contemplation by paying attention, mindful attention to the changing process of experience until some degree of insight arises. And as that mindfulness becomes settled on the changing process of experience, then the mind becomes concentrated, and then through that combination of insight and calm, the path arises. So this is one way of suggesting, well, these are two ways of showing what could come under the heading of practice in accordance with the Dhamma. So you choose your method. Some prefer to develop calm or samatha first, then insight. Others go into this dry insight practice, like in the Mahasi system or the Goenka system. And then as one is practicing this dry insight, it sort of naturally brings along with it the concentration of the mind, even though it might not be jhana concentration, but there is some settling of the mind on the stream of experience, and that is the sufficient for the penetrative insight to arise and for the path to be generated. Okay, so this sutta speaks about the path being generated, the path arising. And that path, what's referred to here as the path, is the irreversible path that culminates in the attainment of stream entry. So if we go back to these 4 stages of attainment, so before each of these stages of attainment is reached, we say that these stages of attainment are the fruits. But leading up to these fruits comes an attainment of a corresponding path. So there is a path to stream entry, a path of the once returner, the path of the non-returner. I can't get my throat clenched. Okay, I got one. Okay, I got 2. Okay. And it's moistens my throat. So leading up to each of these fruits, there's a corresponding path. And when you reach that path, then that means that you are bound to reach the corresponding fruit within the same lifetime. So when you drop into the path, that path is like a stream that will carry you irreversibly to the fruit within that same lifetime. And then there is a number of suttas, a series of suttas, which show how the fruit is attained, or how that path is realized. Usually we say, oh, I'm practicing the path. So if you're doing some meditation, mindfulness of breathing, vipassana meditation, you say, yeah, I'm practicing the Buddha's path. But the word path has sort of 2 nuances. One is the practice in a general way. So we could say, I live by the Noble Eightfold Path. It means I have right view, I have right intentions, I try to follow right speech, right action, right livelihood. I make an effort, I practice right mindfulness. Maybe, maybe not, I've gained right samadhi. So we say I'm practicing the path. So that's the path in the general sense. But the word path is used in a narrower sense as being a particular level of attainment in which, when you reach that path, that the factors, the 8 path factors, become so strong that they just push you forward towards the achievement of the fruit in that same lifetime. And this sutta, or the series of suttas, shows how one moves from the stage of insight to the attainment of that world-transcending path. So the Buddha speaks about, first, he says, the I is impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. It's constantly undergoing alteration. And so the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, the 6 sense bases are impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. And so one is practicing in this way, observing the impermanence, contemplating the impermanence. Okay, but disciples will differ. Those who are going to reach stream entry will differ by way of their dominant faculty into 2 different types. So there are 2 subdivisions among those who reach the path to stream entry. So one predominates in faith, or we could say devotion. So for this person gives precedence to faith, conviction, devotion. So it places faith in these teachings and resolves on them. That person is called a faith follower, one who has entered the fixed course of rightness. The fixed course of rightness, this is that irreversible path to liberation. And it's said that this person has entered the plane of superior persons. This is the plane of the Sappurisa. They've transcended the plane of worldlings. The plane of worldlings, the worldlings are called the putujanas, ordinary people. So the person is incapable of doing any deed because of which they might be reborn in the lower realms, and they're incapable of passing away without realizing the fruit of stream entry. So it means that in that life itself, they have to attain the fruit of stream entry. Okay, the way I understand this, it doesn't mean that you can become, so this person is called the faith follower, sadanusari. The word sada is faith, and anusari is one who literally flows along, moves along. So one who flows along through faith. Okay, but this doesn't, the way I understand this, it doesn't mean that you could become a faith follower just by having faith in the teaching of impermanence. So you have strong faith in impermanence, but you don't do anything else, you're not going to become a faith follower. You have to be practicing some combination of calm and insight, samatha and vipassana. But the way I understand this, some people are motivated to undertake the practice primarily by their faith in the Buddha, their faith in the Dhamma, the faith, conviction in these particular teachings. And so when they practice out of the strong faith and conviction, and then they reach sufficient degree of insight, then they become a faith follower. They've entered this irreversible path called the fixed course of rightness. The fixed course of rightness is samatha, niyama. And the word samatha here, it's just the abstract form of samma. When we speak about the factors of a Noble Eightfold Path, we say samma ditthi and so on to samma samadhi, right view through right concentration. So this is the abstract form, rightness, indicating that now all 8 factors of the Noble Path are present. And niyama indicates that it is something fixed, bound, definite. So in our own lives, sort of as ordinary people, when we're practicing the Noble Eightfold Path, some days we might practice diligently, other days a little bit negligently. We go to a rock concert or a ice cream parlor, okay, whatever. So we're not on the niyama, samatha niyama, but this means that our path is irreversible, bound to reach the goal. So it's called samatha niyama, the fixed way of rightness. Okay, so this is the faith follower. And then the other type of disciple who enters the path is called the Dhamma follower, the Dhammanusari. And this is the person maybe who doesn't have such strong faith, but their sort of motivating factor, the way their minds work, is governed by investigation, inquiry, examination. So they are the type of person who ponders the Dhamma, investigates, examines, and then they gain a certain measure of wisdom. It's not yet really definitive wisdom, but it's a sufficient degree of wisdom to enter the fixed course of rightness. And with this, they enter the plane of superior persons, they transcend the plane of worldlings, and again, so then they're incapable of doing any deed by reason of which they might go to the bad destinations, and they cannot pass away without realizing the fruit of stream entry. Okay, so those are the 2 people on the irreversible path. The faith follower, whose practice is dominated by, governed by faith, and the Dhamma follower, the one whose practice is dominated by, guided by, directed by investigation and wisdom. And what's interesting, in the stage of the path, you see we have the 2 faculties, faith and wisdom. We don't find a class of disciple on the path whose dominant faculty is samadhi. And that suggests that samadhi doesn't become such a crucial factor for entering the path. Of course, you need some degree of samadhi, you have the samadhi to enter the path, but doesn't yet play a dominant role for entering the path. So that's why some teachers say that as long as you have a sort of basic level of samadhi, that is sufficient. But what drives the actual attainment of the path is either the faith and devotion on the one side and investigative wisdom on the other. And then once the person enters the path and then realizes the fruit, then samadhi becomes more important to advance to the higher stages. Okay, so for these disciples, the path has arisen, the world transcending path. Then they have to cultivate that path, and as they do so, then they know and see directly these teachings, and at that point, then they become the stream enterer who's no longer bound to the lower world, fixed in destiny, with enlightenment, with full enlightenment as their destination. I didn't get to today's sutta yet. Okay, so this is all building up to the attainment of stream entry. And so now the Buddha is going to explain in the sutta that we're taking. He says that any householder whose actions are restrained by 5 training rules and who gains at will these 4 pleasant dwellings might declare of themselves that I am a stream enterer, no longer subject to the lower world, fixed in destiny, heading for enlightenment. So we already went through the 5 training rules. Now, what are those 4 pleasant abidings, visible dwellings in this? And it's said that they pertain to the higher mind. Yeah, the higher mind is adhicitta. I think I didn't copy the Pali. It could be adhicettasika, adhicetaso. But anyway, the higher mind is adhicitta, and that is indicating an attainment of samadhi. So these are the 4 types of qualities that pertain to the higher mind. So the noble disciple possesses unwavering confidence, unshakable confidence in the Buddha, and then comes the formula for the qualities of the Buddha. Unshakable confidence in the qualities of the Dhamma, unshakable confidence in the Sangha, described by way of their qualities, and then possesses the virtuous behavior. Here we have the sila. This is the Arya Kanta sila. The sila, love by the noble ones, unbroken, flawless, unblemished, and so on, leading to concentration. So that is the 4th pleasant visible dwelling that pertains to the higher mind. So this is indicating, the way I understand this, it's not just describing simply the trust or confidence of the noble disciple, but since these states are said to pertain to the higher mind, and the higher mind is the attainment of samadhi, what this indicates is that the noble disciple, based on that confidence in the 3 jewels, the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and in the sila, in the observance of the sila, uses those as themes for meditation. And by meditating on these qualities, the virtues of the 3 jewels, they are able, and on the silas, they are able to gain samadhi, a level of concentration, which will not be jhana concentration, but is the level of samadhi that is spoken of in the commentaries as upachara samadhi, neighborhood concentration or access concentration, because they are turning over the mind different qualities. And so the mind doesn't become focused just with that very intense, powerful, one-pointed concentration, but by turning over these different qualities, the mind gains a deep level of concentration, but it's still not yet jhana concentration, but it's still said to pertain to the higher mind. Okay, I wanted to leave some time now for some questions. So let us So if you have questions, the way to do that is by using the hand symbol. Okay, so I see a number of hands up, so we start in order. Samangi?
Yes, thank you, Bhante. I have a couple of questions. Some are related, actually. I
think it's good because I see a number of hands are up. Choose what you consider the most important question, because we want to leave we want to leave time for everybody to ask their questions.
Okay, so in terms of correct lifestyles, one of the things was raising animals. So like Buddha encouraged people to question, I think, not for the doubt, but for clarity. So that's, I think, why I'm questioning. So if one raises animals versus one is doing agriculture,
Yeah.
Or even cotton, where lots of small animals are killed. It's much more unseen, but perhaps even many more lives. So I myself personally is a vegetarian, but this is a question always coming to my mind, if I eat rice versus if I eat some meat, which one actually resulted in more living beings dead, suffering and death. So that's, and the related one is, so I'm questioning not for lack of belief or something. I don't know what the word is, faith, belief, because I'm questioning for understanding, that also for clarity. And when you said in the suttas that one has faith, how do you balance kind of blind faith with critical analysis? Because Buddha did encourage critical analysis. So this is the reason I'm questioning this other thing, not so much in doubt.
Okay, there seem to be several issues here. Okay, first in agriculture, it's inevitable even in cultivating plants, vegetables for food. A farmer, especially large-scale farms, has to protect those plants from being destroyed by, what do they call these?
Pests.
The sort of insects that will eat the plants.
Pests.
Yeah, pests. Yeah, it's an interesting point. I've often wondered, we never say in the suttas, a farmer come to the Buddha and say, Bhante, I try to observe the 5 precepts, but I am a farmer. I have to grow crops to feed my family or to sell on the market. What do I do?
Buddha himself, I'm sorry to interrupt. Buddha himself apparently looked at a worm at the harvest festival when he was young, apparently, and saw the suffering, and that was what created his thinking. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah. So we never find any passage like that in the text. But my supposition is that there's a difference between, like, killing an animal. You bring the animal to slaughter, you perform the act of slaughtering, or you raise the animal knowing the animal is going to be slaughtered. So that is the purpose of your livelihood. Whereas in the case of the farmer, say they spread some pesticide, they're not sort of targeting specific creatures that they see, but they have to do this. It seems to be one of the inevitable, inescapable requirements requirements for earning a living.
Could you not say the same thing about then meat? One has to have something to eat, so I'm choosing the method that kills fewer animals. It could be compassionate way of thinking of eating meat in some ways.
Yeah, but I'd say it's sort of more direct and visible in the case of killing the animal to eat its flesh. But even the Buddha doesn't require vegetarianism of his disciples. You know, he says, even for the monastic disciples, he says, if you don't see, learn by hearsay, or suspect an animal has been killed specifically for you, then it's acceptable to eat the flesh of that animal if it's sort of ready, prepared on the market. Yeah, those are just big issues that could be discussed for hours. I don't have a clear solution, but let's get questions that pertain more directly to.
So faith versus critical analysis.
Yeah, I think that's the Buddha says that you ground your faith upon investigation. He says you don't just believe blindly, but you have to examine. He says you examine me, to his immediate disciples, examine my conduct, and you examine the Dhamma by questioning, investigating, till you gain this confidence grounded in reason and investigation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Kevin?
Thank you, Bhante. A quick technical note. I think your mic, it's getting distorted a lot today. So it might be like a little bit close to your mouth, or the levels might be a little sensitive. But we can still hear you. We can still understand you. But my question is, thank you for speaking to the relationship of samadhi to the stream entry. Nowadays, we see some practitioners, they seem to relate a certain level of jhana or other meditation accomplishment directly to stream entry or one of the higher stages. Like, I achieve this degree of meditation, and therefore that makes me a stream entry or a once returner or so forth. And it struck me that that doesn't seem to be grounded in the suttas, and that doesn't seem to be what you're saying. So could you speak a little bit more directly to that? Is at any point a certain attainment and meditation directly related to a higher level, or is it just one part of reaching a higher level?
Yeah, I think I lost track of the question. I thought I was following the question, whether the attainment of jhana itself marks the attainment of stream entry.
Yeah, for stream entry and once returner, non-returner, does a high level of jhana or any meditation accomplishment specifically mark the achievement of that stage, or is the meditation accomplishment just one piece of attaining a higher stage?
I would say, of course, or normally one would need, even for stream entry, some balance of or success in calm and insight, samatha and vipassana. But in my view, the calm factor doesn't have to amount to jhana attainment, and jhana attainment by itself, without deep and clear insight, does not signify the attainment of stream entry. I say the point may be where attainment of jhana becomes important, if not essential, is in making the stage from the once returner to the stage of non-returner. Because there are some suttas which speak about the attainment of the stage of non-returner and arhatship by attaining a jhana and then examining the jhana with insight.
I see. Thank you, Bhante.
Yeah, but the Theravada tradition, or based on the Visuddhimagga and the commentaries, recognize a class even of arhats who don't attain the jhanas, but they reach the final goal just through insight based on a sufficient level of samadhi, but samadhi not amounting to jhana. And certainly jhanas on their own are not equivalent to the noble attainments.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, Lucas. Lucas.
Bhante, it's an honor. Can you hear me?
Okay, okay.
Okay. Bhante, I was doing an exercise of imagination on the Sotapanna, thinking on the disciples of the Buddha with very mature faculties that only hearing like one phrase about the Dhamma achieve Sotapanna or even further levels of awakening. So I was imagining like, for example, a practitioner of Abraham. Can you hear me? It's all right?
Yeah,
Okay.
the volume was a little low.
Okay. Like, for example, a practitioner of another tradition that doesn't know the Dhamma, but is a mature practitioner and wants to get a certain insight on impermanence and not self. And that transforms him, but he still doesn't know the Dhamma, So later he know the Dhamma and say, that was it. That was my personal experience that I had before.
Yeah.
Should this person be considered Sotapanna before reaching the Dhamma with no theoretical, but he personally saw it, That's my questions.
Yeah, it's something I'm not able to speak about. It's something that's beyond my range of personal knowledge. It would seem that in other traditions, there is not the methods of practice that lead to stream entry. Whether somebody outside the Buddhist tradition can find on their own the methods of practice that will lead to stream entry, that I don't know. But I don't think that the clear instructions on the methods of practice one finds outside.
Okay, Bhante, it was exercise of imagination. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, next is Kat.
Good morning, Bhante.
Good morning.
Thank you for having me. So my question related to the right livelihood for trading weapons. So let's say that those people who work for Department of Defense and they under the acquisition department supporting the combat commander to purchase weapon for the soldier, and those people who work is numbers, tracking the contract, make sure the contractor comply with the federal regulation. Would those people who work under the acquisition division under Department of Defense violate the Buddha teaching or violate the trading weapons?
Yeah, this is a very, very subtle question, because there are all sorts of degrees, gradations in this issue, these different types of wrong livelihood. And it's a debatable question at what point one steps over sort of the boundary line from right livelihood to wrong livelihood. Okay, so somebody is working in the Department of Defense, say, as maybe a computer analyst or programmer or doing something else, but not as directly involved the sale of the weapons or the acquisition of weapons. In my opinion, that would not be wrong. That would not be wrong livelihood. But others might argue from a different standpoint. But I would say, because the Buddha, of course, he's speaking against the economic background of his own time, when people are, maybe they don't even have guns in that time. Weapons will be knives and spears and other types of manual armaments. So it's a very clear who is making weapons and who isn't. I guess you just have to use your own judgment in determining where the boundaries lie. I don't have any definitive opinion about that.
Thank you, Bhante.
Yeah. Okay, Jaden.
Hello, Bhante. My question is related to the 4 jhanas. So I was reading online that when you achieve the 3rd jhana, the joy passes away. Would one just stop being happy and just stop laughing, or what? I don't understand.
Yeah, I'm not getting so clearly. Maybe try again. The sound is very metallic. Yes.
Hello.
Yeah.
My question is related to the four jhanas. Nothing.
Yeah.
When I read that if when you achieve the third jhana,
Yeah.
Joy passes away. Does one stop just being happy and laugh,
Yeah.
or would they just still laugh from entertainment?
Now, this is referring to particular mental states. It's sort of not the general mood, but there's a particular mental factor called piti, which some translate as joy to make it easy. Earlier I used rapture, elation. So this is a mental factor present in the first jhana and the second jhana. It's a kind of upliftment of the mind, but it's a little bit coarse. And so to move to the third jhana, one has to eliminate that factor of piti. So piti falls away when one moves to from the second jhana to the third jhana. But the other factor called sukha, which is the feeling tone of the experience, which is the pleasant feeling tone, that remains. So in the third jhana, one has sukha, a pleasant feeling, a blissful feeling, but that excitement, upliftment, elation of the mind that we call piti, that is vanished, that is dropped away.
Okay, thank you, Bhante.
Okay, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to end the session now. I see there are a few more hands raised, but they're waiting for me up at the dining hall for the meal. So we'll have to end. We'll end with the sharing of the merits, and then the 3 bows to the Buddha. So I'm going to do quickly the dedication or sharing of the merits. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasata chabumata Deva naga mahedika punyantam anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang dukha pata chani dukha baya pata chani baya soka pata chani soka kantu sabepi panino. May those in suffering be free from suffering. May those in fear be free from fear. May those in sorrow be free from sorrow. May all living beings also be thus. And then we're going to do 3 actual bows to the Buddha. So we have a Buddha image here in the library, so we're going to do the actual bow to them. So I'm going to get up. Okay, so thank you all for joining us.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Bhante. Bow to Bhante. Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Good class,
Bhante,
Bhante.
good to see you.
Excellent class, Bhante. Thank you so much.
Enjoy the dance.
Thank you, Bhante.
Have a good meal. Take care. Have a good week.
Good to have you,
Saruan
Bhante.
Sarnai Bhante. Namo Buddhaya. Take care
Thank
of
you,
your health,
Bhante.
Bhante.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Okay, take care.
Take care.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you.
Good night.
Yeah.